Yeah.
Go.
Okay. So what I did is a collection of 4 pictures, and what I focused on was the characterization. And so these are just a visual representation of the characterization of 4 major characters in Hamlet. And I'm gonna ask you which character you think goes with each picture. So we're gonna start with this one. Which character do you think this is?
Nemo.
Hamlet. Okay, yeah, it's Hamlet. So now I'm gonna take this off. Let's see Hamlet. Okay,
Very nice
so
writing.
Hamlet is obviously the protagonist of the play Hamlet, and he's a really complex character. And we, the audience, and the other characters in the play, kind of come away from the whole situation with a feeling of kind of ambiguity about Hamlet's persona, basically. And after the death of his father, Hamlet becomes really suspicious of his uncle Claudius, and he thinks that Claudius is responsible for the death of King Hamlet. And adding to that suspicion is the fact that Claudius and his mother Gertrude get married within 2 months of the death. And so with all this overwhelming suspicion, Hamlet kind of transforms from just a young man into this grown man seeking to avenge his father's death, basically. And throughout the play, so he's plotting to kill Claudius. And there's some dramatic irony because we understand what he's doing when he says he's crazy and that he's not, so he's crazy. But everybody else, the other characters in the play, think that he actually is crazy. And but I think that some of that insanity that he claims he has is kind of a reflection of the inner turmoil he's feeling, because he's constantly contemplating his own existence and whether it's worth living or not. And he says that in one of Shakespeare's most famous soliloquies, Hamlet says, "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortunes, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and, by opposing, end them." So this picture kind of matches that quote. It's obviously taken over the edge of a building, and it's supposed to evoke Hamlet's feelings of whether or not life is worth it, basically. And as a viewer, you kind of get the sense that whoever's standing here, in this case Hamlet, could just make one choice in 1 second and just end his life. And that's kind of what Hamlet's dealing with the whole time, is whether he wants to exist or not. And so it's kind of designed to match Hamlet's mood throughout the play. Also, the picture's in black and white, and that contrast is supposed to represent how Hamlet, it's kind of like a subtext that we don't really, it's not really obvious, but it's there. And he just thinks that he has 2 choices, and that's either to die or that he can continue through this horrible life, and that it's basically just going to stay horrible. So he feels like he has only 2 choices. So as a whole, the picture is meant to evoke some danger and some uneasiness for the reader, which is just supposed to match the feelings that Hamlet has inside. So next is this one. Who do you think this one is?
Ophelia.
Yeah. Okay, so Ophelia is a beautiful young girl. She is the daughter of Polonius and sister of Laertes, and she's the love interest of the protagonist, Hamlet. Basically, Polonius forbids her from seeing Hamlet, and because of this, she kind of learns to ignore his love for her. And ultimately, she betrays him by providing Polonius, who's this infamous spy of a character, basically with information about Hamlet. And that leads Hamlet to kill Polonius. And I would say that the death of Polonius kind of begins Ophelia's descent into madness, basically. And it becomes worse and worse as time goes on, and eventually she's found dead in the water. And the circumstances, how it's described in the play, one would think that it's a suicide, but then Gertrude comes in and she says this in regards to Ophelia's death. "When down her weedy trophies and herself fell in the weeping brook, her clothes spread wide, and mermaid-like a while they bore her up, which time she chanted snatches of old tunes, as one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and endued to that element. But long it could not be, till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death." So as a result of her madness, it's easy to assume that the death was a suicide, but I think this passage shows that there's a lot more to it. Maybe that it was more passive rather than a suicidal choice that she made. So maybe she didn't like throw herself into the water, but at the same time she didn't fight to get out when she easily could have escaped. So I think there's a lot more to Ophelia than is just on the surface, and that's kind of what the picture is showing. I think after the death of Polonius, she's feeling really lost in her own life. She is like really depressed, and she can't seem to get back to the normality of her old life when she was happy and everything was fine. So I think it's like a search for that peace is what the whole process with Ophelia is towards the end of the novel or the play. And this picture represents kind of mad, the crazy Ophelia, I guess, at the end of the play, viewing the old Ophelia, which is supposed to be this silhouette, is just kind of like her normal life. So she's searching for peace, and this is basically ultimately where she finds it, is in this like really solitary setting, which matches how she's feeling lonely and just by the water, and she finally realizes that maybe the only way to get back to that peace, to have that comfort of her old life, is to die when she's in the water. So this is where she ultimately finds her peace, and that leads her to the end of her life. Okay, so next is this one. This one's kind of hard. These last two are kind of hard. What do you think this is?
Gertrude.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, so this is Gertrude. Gertrude is the mother of young Hamlet, and she, more than any other character, is the antithesis of her son. Basically, because Hamlet is constantly dealing with these inner questions and inner issues, and Gertrude is the complete opposite. She's just concerned about the outer world and the exterior world and how it perceives her, basically. And that whole attitude, that whole state of mind of Gertrude can be viewed as like shallow or off-putting a little bit, and especially when, after the death of King Hamlet, we see that Hamlet's grieving and he's wearing, like the black clothes, and she says to her son, she says, "Good Hamlet, cast thy nighted color off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not forever with thy valid lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou knowest 'tis common that all lives must die, passing through nature to eternity." So she's trying to get Hamlet to understand that death is a part of life, and that you can't really, it's going to happen, so you can't really let it affect you so much. And this is one of the points, a lot of points in the play, Gertrude brings up these questions for the audience and the other characters within the play. Like, is she really just like really mean and just saying that to her son, or is there something more to that? Did she know about the death of King Hamlet? Does she really love Claudius? And that brings kind of like, it's kind of overwhelming to the audience, and especially to Hamlet, and you add that with the frustration of she remarried after his father died so quickly. And Hamlet says in a monologue that's kind of, it deals with all women, but it's directly dealing with Gertrude. He says, "And yet within a month, let me not think on it, frailty thy name is woman." So to an extent, he's condemning all women, but particularly Gertrude. He doesn't really understand that Gertrude just has a different view of life than him, and he finds it kind of very frustrating. And it brings to the attention of the audience that Gertrude does seem to lack the ability and kind of like the ability to like think critically and logically when she really needs to. And we find that she always goes to like the safe option. So when her husband died and Claudius comes along, she finds like security in having somebody with her. So she marries him out of that need for security and safety, or that's how it appears. So this photo represents her point of view of life, basically. As you can see, it's like a really narrow, your focal point is out here, and that's supposed to be the outside world, and that the walls kind of block everything else, and all that's important to her is how the outside world views her and how she appears to be to the outside world. And she's coming out of a tunnel, and that tunnel is like what's behind her. You can't see it, but it's like implied. It's that it's really dark, and those are